This is section 9.2, part B, two-sided tests. Both the free throw shooter and the blemished potato examples involved one-sided test. We assumed that our alternative hypothesis was either less than or greater than. Let's look at a situation that requires a two-sided test, or we say the alternative hypothesis is P does not equal the value of the null hypothesis. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, 50% of high school students have never smoked a cigarette. Trevor wonders whether this national result holds true in his large urban high school. For his AP Statistics class project, Trevor surveyed a simple random sample of 150 students from his school. He gets responses from all 150 students, and 90 say that they have never smoked a cigarette. What should Trevor conclude? Give appropriate evidence to support your answer. So we're going to start with the state. Remember, in your state, you're going to tell what you're going to be trying to solve. You're going to state the significance level, you're going to give the hypotheses, and you are going to define that parameter. So we want to perform a significance test for using the hypotheses that the null hypothesis is that the proportion equals 50%. The alternative, we don't know if it's going to be greater than or less than. We just think it might be different. So we're going to say the alternative hypothesis is P does not equal 50%, where P is the actual proportion of students in Trevor's school who would say that they have never smoked a cigarette. Because no significance level was stated, we are going to let our alpha equal 0.05. Now for our plan, we're going to state what tests we will do, and then we'll check our conditions. So if conditions are met, we'll do a one sample z-test for the population proportion P. For our random, it does say Trevor surveyed a simple random sample of 150 students from his school. To check for normal, we're going to do the number of the sample size times the probability of success and the sample size times the probability of failure. And both of these we're going to get 75, and those are at least 10, so our normal condition is met. And for independent, since this is a large urban high school, we can assume 10 times 150, which is 1,500 students. We can assume there's at least 1,500 students in the school, so the independent condition has been met. Next, we will do the do part of our problem. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find our p hat value, or our sample proportion. We said 90 of the 150 students said they've never smoked a cigarette, which is 60%. Next, you need to find your test statistic, or the z-score, which is just going to be p hat minus p all over the standard deviation, which you will have to find the sample standard deviation. And that's going to give us a z-score of 2.45. Now, if we look this up at our table, if we have a z-score of 2.45, that's going to give us an area to the left of that of 0.9929. So if we do 1 minus that, that'll tell us the area to the right, which is 0.0071. But this is a two-tailed test, so we also have the exact same amount on the left tail. So we're going to do 2 times that quantity, and that's going to give us our p-value of 0.0142. Now we need to write our conclusion. So since our p-value of 0.0142 is less than the alpha level of 0.05, we have significant evidence to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the proportion of students at Trevor's school who say that they have never smoked differs from the national result of 50%. When you go to take your AP exam, if you were asked to carry out a significance test on the AP exam but they don't give you a level, I recommend that you use the alpha equals 5%. You might have wondered why the potato chip producer chose a significance level of alpha equals 10, but we opted for 5 instead for the non-smokers example. Recall that from section 9.1 that the probability of a type 1 error is equal to your alpha. So the potato chip producer would rather make a type 1 error where they send away potatoes that they could have used than a type 2 error, which is accepting a truckload of potatoes that have blemishes to make potato chips with. A greater risk of type 1 error means a smaller risk of making a type 2 error, and higher power to detect the specific alternative value of the parameter. For Trevor's non-smoker study, neither a type of error seems very serious, we therefore use the default significance level of alpha equals 0.05. Does the way we define success matter? In the last example, we viewed a non-smoker as success and a smoker as a failure. Suppose we reverse the two. Then the new parameter of interest would be P equals the proportion of students at Trevor's school who have smoked. If 90 students have never smoked, then 60 of them have smoked. So let's repeat the significance test with this new definition of success. So we're still going to have the same null and alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis would be 50 of them have smoked, and the other would be 50% have not smoked. Our p hat is going to change, so it's going to be 60 out of 150, which is going to give us 0.4 for our p hat. If we find our z-score is going to be negative 2.45. Now that's just giving us the opposite tail. So now we just have the area to the left of that. We're still just going to double that to find the other side. And so on a two-tailed test, it's still going to give us the same answer. So when you reverse success and failures, we simply change the sign of the z value for our test statistic. Instead of being a positive 2.45, now it is a negative 2.45. The p-value remained the same. This fact is true in general. Our conclusion does not depend on our initial choice of success or failure. So let's check our understanding. According to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, job stress poses a major threat to the health of workers. In a national survey of restaurant employees, 75% said that work stress had a negative impact on their personal lives. Managers of a large restaurant chain wondered whether this national result holds for their employees. A random sample of 100 employees finds that 68% answered yes when asked, does work stress have a negative impact on your personal life? Is this good reason to think that the proportion of employees in this chain who would say yes differs from the national proportion of 75%? Support your answer with a significance test. So first, again, we're going to start with our state. You're going to say what type of preference we're going to look for. So we're going to look at our significance level, we're going to look at our null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, and we're going to define our parameter. So we're going to perform a test at the alpha equals 0.05 significance level. Our null hypothesis is that the p-value is 75%. The alternative is that it's not 75%, where p is the actual proportion of restaurant employees who say that work stress has a negative impact on their lives. For our plan, you're going to say what type of test you're going to run, and then you are going to check the conditions. So if the conditions are met, we should do a one sample z test for the population proportion p. It does say that the sample was randomly selected. Because this is a proportion, we're going to do the sample size times the probability of success and sample size times the probability of failure, and both of those need to at least be 10. We have 75 and 25, so those are both at least 10, so we're good there. And we can assume that if this is a large restaurant chain, that there's going to be more than 1,000 workers, so that 10% condition is met. So all the conditions have been met, and we can now do the do part of our problem. We're going to start by finding that p hat value, and they tell you that 68% said yes, or 68 out of the 100, which gives us 68%. We're going to find our test statistic, or the z-score. So we're going to do that 0.68 divided by that 0.75 all over the standard deviation of this sample. Remember to do that, it's the square root of the probability of success times the probability of failure all over the sample size. And we're going to get a z value of negative 1.62. Now, on this, negative 1.62 is going to be over here. We can find the area to the left of that, which if you look at your table, you look up the z-score of negative 1.62, it's going to give you an area to the left of that of 0.0526. But remember, this is a two-tailed test, so we also need to find the area on the tail on the right. So if we multiply this by 2, we're going to get an area of 0.1052. The last thing we need to do is just make our conclusion. So since our p-value of 0.1052 is greater than 0.05, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. We do not have enough evidence to conclude that the proportion of restaurant employees at this large restaurant chain who say their work stress has a negative impact on their personal lives is different from the national proportion of 75%.